I'm going to pass it to Amity for a little introduction, and then I'll give a run of show, and then we'll start.
Okay. Thanks, Shayna. Yeah, it's really exciting to see everyone here. This has been uh, an idea in the back of our head now for, I don't know, 8 or 9 months. But give you a quick introduction. My name is Amity Doolittle, and I'm faculty at the Yale School of the Environment. And I'm PI on this research project that we're calling the Success Lab. So quickly to just introduce the research team, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the project. So Liz Felker, as we said, is in Tennessee, is the program manager, sort of keeping us all on track and moving the project forward. And she's just been a great intellectual companion on these ideas, as has Shayna Moss, who's a research fellow and calling in from California right now. And then recently, Odi Kotagama joined our team. He's working from New Haven. And they each bring really unique backgrounds and perspectives to the project. So that's very exciting. And we're really excited to kind of extend this network. The Success Lab grew out of this growing interest. I had to better understand the role of local, place-based environmental nonprofits in environmental governance. I'm curious about this because my training as a political ecologist leads me to believe, and I think history tells us that really transformative social or environmental change is often initiated from the bottom up. So what those local place-based ENGOs are doing is so important. And I think we haven't really fully conceptualized that in terms of environmental governance, but also in terms of our democratic foundations for a nation. And I think it's all the more important to really be thinking about that right now. So with that as a starting point, we started to think about how can we capture, measure, communicate the impact of the work that's happening with local place-based ENGOs. So that we can scale out and not scale up. I always have a bit of a reaction to that, but scale out their work and amplify the impact. And I think we all know that the current metrics, which are so often driven by funders, tend to be very quantitative: numbers of tree planted, numbers of community meetings, weeds eradicated, volunteer hours. And that just is really inadequate to capture the depth and richness of the work. So as we started looking to see what's out there, what existing tools are there, and also really looking for tools that practitioners could access and utilize, we were really intrigued by this ripple effect mapping. In fact, we were using the word ripple effect long before we knew. Lots of other people had been thinking about it. And we wanted to learn more from this approach. So we were so excited to be able to invite sort of the intellectual founders of this method and wanted to start this conversation that goes across academics and policymakers and practitioners. We have at least two of the executive directors for the pilot ENGOs that we're working with for the Success Lab. So excited to have their participation as well as others. And one of the reasons this is so important to me is, as a educator of future environmental leaders, are we giving them the tools to really think about the impact of their work, and how can we help make them more successful? So really excited to bring together people with such different perspectives and training and background, and hope we can have a really productive conversation drawing on our individual expertise, but then being able to step outside it and think about the application of that.
Thank you, Amity. So, brief run of show, just so everyone knows sort of what the next hour and a half looks like. We'll start with presentations from Chris Smith and Abba Kaiser to hear two examples of experiences using ripple effects mapping, or REM, in practice. And then we'll learn about the approach in more detail from some of the founders and practitioners of REM. And for that, we're joined by Scott Chasden, Mary Emery, Lori Higgins, Rebecca Serro, and Deborah Hansen. And then in the final half of the seminar today, we'll have breakout groups to discuss approaches to capturing NGO impact, including REM, but you all have the opportunity to bring up other approaches or challenges you've come across in this realm. And then for anyone who wants to stay after, at the end, we'll have a Q&A with REM folks. So to kick things off, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Chris Smith. Dr. Chris Smith, who is a community-based researcher and policy analyst at Headwaters Economics, specializing in rural development, government finance, and climate hazards. She has an MS in community development and applied economics from the University of Vermont and a PhD in earth sciences and economic geography from Montana State University. And Dr. Smith's research emphasizes practical, data-driven solutions for rural communities facing complex environmental and economic challenges. So thank you. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Shayna, and thanks everyone for having me. I can see my face, so let me just to close that down. Okay. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about ripple effects mapping because it's been a pretty powerful tool that we've used in some of our community assistance work. So like Shayna said, I work for Headwaters Economics. We're an independent nonprofit research organization based in Montana, but we work all over the country. And we have an arm that works directly with local governments around disaster resilience. So I'm going to talk to you about the FloodWise program that I help lead. And this is our pilot program in Three Forks, Montana. We've been working with them since 2020. You're looking at Crystal and Kelly on the left. This is the entirety of the local government staff that is not public works. So it's a small community of about 2,000 people. And they have incredibly severe flood risk. And they just found out that it was worse than they expected with some updated flood risk mapping. So when they found that out, they brought in a project team of the city, again, basically Crystal and Kelly, us, Headwaters Economics, we brought in Great Rest Engineering, our state partners from DNRC and DES, so emergency services and the floodplain experts, and then FEMA Region 8. And we've been working together since 2020. So, it's 5 years of work. These are really long-term, big projects. And we got to a point at Headwaters where we kind of had the story of the impact that we were having. We've been pretty successful. We, identified a solution to the flood risk. We got them FEMA funding to actually do the construction. We're going through permitting now, and construction is going to start either later this year or early next year. But there's so much more from this collaborative that we knew was happening, and so much important relationship building and impacts that weren't being measured, like we said, by our typical metrics that we give our funders, that that was one of the big reasons why we wanted to do a ripple effects map with them. And the other side of that too, you can imagine after 5 years of meeting monthly, like these are big, long projects, we weren't doing a good job, in my opinion, I guess, of stepping back and celebrating all that we've done together. So the ripple effects map was also kind of an excuse, I guess, to get together and say, like, wow, we've actually accomplished quite a bit, and that's really important, and we need to take a break and celebrate that, because these projects are long, and motivation can, it can vary, I guess, over that time, although this team has been incredible. So back in March, we gathered state partners, our lead engineer. Crystal was actually on medical leave from the city, but Kelly was able to attend, and then Headwaters Economics to do the ripple effect mapping. It was a small group. There were only 6 of us, and I was really worried that it wouldn't work with this amount of people. I always heard like, oh, maybe you should have 10 to 15 or something like that. And I didn't know if we would actually take up the 2 hours I had put aside, but we did, and we had way more to talk about. I could have easily been a 4-hour or even day-long workshop. But we started with the one-on-one interviews to try to think about all the impacts we've had together. And then we did this group mapping. And obviously my handwriting is pretty crappy. And sometimes you see these ripple effects map and they're beautiful, and ours is a little bit more scattered. But it was a really powerful conversation. I thought I would just give you a brief overview of some of the stuff that comes out of doing this type of exercise with community partners and state partners. I'm not going to go through all of it. And so let me back up and say, during that conversation, I recorded it and then transcribed it and coded it. And I've been coding it in different ways. This local, state, national framework is most useful, I think, for Headwaters Economics as we're communicating to our funders. But there are other ways to code it that I think are more useful to the community. And that's something I would love to talk with this group and how you think about coding. So one thing that I'll just point out, my absolute favorite impact from this whole project is that Kelly and Crystal didn't quit. So if you ever have worked with a local community that finds out they have really high flood risk that they weren't expecting, they literally were like, we're not doing this, we're gonna quit. And when the project came together and offered a potential solution for them, they didn't quit. And if you work in a rural community, that is huge. So that's my favorite impact across the board, that we managed to support, local government staff in their jobs. There's been a lot of other stuff that came out, including our state agency saw how well this collaborative approach worked, and they've actually created a technical assistance program based on it. And at the national level, since Headwaters is a research organization, we've had a lot of research come out of this pilot project that's actually led us to testify to Congress on ways to improve basically how to improve access to federal programs for particularly rural and lower capacity places. So lots of interesting impacts. I'll just say, as the program kind of coordinator, I knew about all of these. So I wasn't super surprised by this conversation, but I wanted to end just by saying there were a lot of unexpected impacts that came out. And one is around kind of knowledge sharing and joint ownership, which I think we would all expect from a collaborative. But the fact that the city and the engineer both said that this was the most important impact really changed how I've been talking about this project's importance. And what the engineer told us was, typically with these big flood risk projects, they come in, it immediately becomes an engineering project, and they're, on the hook for all of it, the good and the bad. Because we took a collaborative approach here, the community has actually been involved with, the city staff have been involved with all the processes, and they can talk about all the challenges and the permitting. So instead of just sending community members to talk to the engineer with questions, they're able to field them. And they also feel much more ownership over it. And that was important both for the city and the engineer. And so it's just those cool kind of unexpected framings that I think when you talk about impacts that come out of doing a ripple effects mapping that have been really powerful. Where we are now, I'm still thinking about how I want to write this up. I want to do like a one-pager for the community, and there's so many different ways to like slice and dice the data that I haven't quite figured out the perfect approach yet, but that's the next step for us. I can't wait to hear from our experts in the room and all the ways that they've thought about how to communicate results. We've already shared some initial stuff with our funders, and funders are really excited about the ripple effects mapping, just to add a little bit more depth and nuance to some of the normal metrics that they see. So I'll pass it back, and here's my contact information, and I'll stick around for Q&A at the very end too, in case anyone has any questions. But thanks again for having me.
Thanks, Chris. That was really insightful. Next, we have Abba Kaiser, who is the founder of Watershed Productions and the current Assistant Director of Outreach for Organic Seed Alliance. Abba's work blends her love for media production with her dedication to culturally relevant food and farming projects. They've organized events like the Cascadia Grains Conference and the International Research Symposium. And in 2020, Abba was recognized as Capital Press's Western Innovator for their unwavering commitment to data equity and participatory frameworks. Over to you, Abba.
Thanks, Odie, and hi, everyone. And can I just say, Kristen, that was an incredible presentation, and I'm so glad that they didn't quit. It's a great impact to see. My presentation is going to be a little different because my experience with ripple effects mapping is as a contractor through my production company, Watershed. I'm just going to share my screen. This is our website. We come in and help nonprofits execute on their food farming and culturally relevant projects. We focus on media, we focus on events, storytelling, consulting, project management. And so we're really producers, we're artists. We've had a foot in the food and farming world for many, many years. And through this, I got involved with the Northwest Agricultural Business Center. But really it was their vision. So we were coming in as project managers with a sprawling grant through AMS, which we randomly got tagged as the organization to help AMS do an example of ripple effects mapping. So really we were chosen out of a lottery to do this work. And it's ironic because I've worked with Rebecca Serro and with Deborah and have had a huge interest in ripple effects mapping with my previous role at WSU Food Systems. So I was thrilled that randomly we got asked to participate in this exercise, which for us was sort of icing on the cake of this sprawling grant called the Western Washington Food Systems Partnership. So I'm out here on the Olympic Peninsula, but the work was regional to the Washington, Oregon, and Idaho region. And what we came up with, I'm gonna share my screen again. We ended up doing a report on some of the work that we had done together, which I'll show you in just a second what the actual map looked like. This is the name of the project, and you can see here, this is the actual map that we had from our ripple effects exercise. It had 4 arms, and those 4 arms touched all of this other information. We had about 15 people participate in the online ripple effects mapping exercise that Deborah helped us with. And I would say that, you know, from my perspective, this really helped educate people within the different 4 areas of the project who was even involved in the same organization. I feel like there are so many acronyms sometimes that you know, folks might not even know, for example, that, you know, Western Washington Food Systems Partnership is actually objective 1 of a 4 objective grant that is through AMS and NABC. It's, you know, this can really contextualize the work and help to educate people on who their colleagues are and the impact. So let's just focus on one of these branches for a second. So this was a steering committee of industry professionals and resource providers and folks who are a part of the food systems here, and looking at what the greatest impacts were. One of the best things that the team helped us do was pull out quotes that you can see here to support some of the things that were tracked during our session. And you know, to your point, Kristen, some of the most important things to recognize are just that it's about people in the end. And I think that this just shows that it's, you know, inherently something that we all know, but it's, you know, the most impactful event that we had was one that brought everyone together to be people together, right? So human relationships driving the success of these organizations, and being the heroes at the end of the day. And it was, you know, even funny to tease out the different objectives from each other because they were so super interconnected, which is, you know, I think going to help inform how we approach the next grant as well. So this was just helpful to see how things all branched out and dovetailed. There's Farm to Food Bank initiative in here, the Washington Food Hub Network supply chain. As you can see, those are, you know, somewhat related, but very distinct parts of the initiative. And then we also had Objective 4 here, which was an advanced business curriculum for farmers as well, which had a whole other cohort than the other 3. And so, yeah, I'll just end by, you know, reading out some of the quotes from one of the farmers who participated in that section, which is that, you know, just being able to language how much impact this had on them in terms of connecting to food hubs, which, you know, again, could be blended down here into the food hub and farm to food bank work that we've been doing as well. So it helped us see where the potential connecting points could be when we're talking about integrating feedback together and combining programming, especially as we're in a place where nonprofits are being starved, looking at some of the ways that we can strategically bring together some of the initiatives that have inherent connections. This was a really helpful tool to help visualize that. So I'll leave it there, and yeah, I'll be sticking around as well for questions. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Ava. It's great. It's really cool to see the visual. Also, there's really crazy noise construction outside, and I apologize if that is audible to you guys. So now we're gonna switch to our ripple effects mapping experts, Lori Higgins, Mary Emery, Scott Chasden, Rebecca Serro, and Deborah Hansen. And in the chat, we're posting full bios. To start off, Dr. Lori Higgins has a background in the land grant extension system as a rural community development specialist. She's also a professor in the Department of Agriculture Economics and Rural Sociology at University of Idaho. And there she specializes in participatory community assessment and action planning leadership development, and arts-based economic development. And she came to ripple effects mapping out of a need to evaluate impacts of complex evolving community development programs.
Thank you. We're also joined by Mary Emery, who is the Director of Rural Prosperity Nebraska and has a deep and abiding interest in community and economic development research and practice. Much of her work focuses on supporting rural communities to build their capacity to make for themselves a more prosperous future. A co-author of Field Guide for Community Coaching and Field Guide to Ripple Effect Mapping, she regularly provides workshops and training on community development processes and approaches. Back to you, Shayna.
And then Scott Chasden is a sociologist and evaluation consultant with over 35 years of experience in both qualitative and quantitative methodology, as well as participatory evaluation. And for 17 years, he was with the University of Minnesota Extension, leading efforts to measure program outcomes and community level impacts, and was an early adopter and champion of REM. He earned his PhD in sociology from University of Denver, MA in sociocultural anthropology from the University of Florida, and a BA in urban studies from Macalester College.
And then we have Dr. Rebecca Ciro, who is a qualitative researcher and evaluator whose work has focused on understanding the why underneath the surface, the story behind the numbers, and the answers to the posed question. Rebecca helps conduct and train on in-depth ripple effects mapping and is most often engaged with determining how to best analyze the rich data that is produced from REM evaluations.
And then we have Deborah Hansen here, who might not be able to go off mic due to internet connectivity, but Deborah is a community and economic development Washington State University Extension educator in rural Northeast Washington, and developed an early version of ripple effects mapping to understand the complex stories and outcomes from the work she did with communities. So she continues to conduct these REM sessions and train others on how to do it too. So without further ado.
All right, well, we divvied this up, so I'm going to start us off, and happy to be here today. To get ready for today, you know, I've often used definitions of ripple effects mapping that we have in our various publications, but out of curiosity, I went on the Google and did a search, and you know how you can get the AI response to questions now. So I asked Google to give me a definition of ripple effects mapping, and this is what I got, which is kind of pretty good definition. So I thought I'd share it with you. So ripple effects mapping is a participatory evaluation technique used to visualize and analyze the intended and unintended impacts of projects, programs, or initiatives. It helps to uncover the ripple effects that extend out from an intervention, capturing the full scope of changes and contributions. And there's a lot of words in there that you're going to hear repeated in our presentation today, and we already heard about the unintended. You'll probably recognize some of those words as we go along. One of the things that's really cool, first of all, it's a participatory method. We'll be talking more about that. But over the years, and we've been doing the ripple mapping, I've been doing it since 2010, and some of my colleagues here have been doing it even longer. And we keep learning about new ways to use it. And along the way, initially it was used primarily as a summative tool. So after the program has ended, to go back in and bring people together and reflect on the impacts of the effort. But we've also learned, and that's great, it's very useful, but we've also learned that it can be used as a developmental evaluation tool, which means you do it sort of mid-process, and that can inform sort of decisions about how you continue to do the program, and then you can revisit that ripple map after the program has ended and add more ripples to it. I've also heard about people using ripple mapping even at the very beginning to sort of, and that gets to some definitional issues here because it is intended to be a retrospective process, and other kinds of mapping do exist, like concept mapping, that are more prospective. So that's part of the definition, is that it is retrospective. One of the cool things about ripple mapping is that it really fits with complexity with the fact that there's multiple causes of any effects that happen, and ripple mapping allows you to sort of identify the roles of different players and of people working together to lead to an outcome. So, that's in contrast to some more quantitative approaches, which might have models and might be able to model some sort of multi-causal situation, but the second something changes on the ground, their model doesn't work anymore. So ripple mapping is more flexible and more adaptable and useful for realities that are flexible and constantly changing. We've also learned over the years that you can conduct ripple mapping. It's best, in my opinion, to do in person with a meal. But we've also learned, even before the pandemic, that we can conduct ripple effects mapping online. There's different strategies for that, and we can be happy to answer questions about that later. We're not going to go into depth, but it is possible to do that. And I like to say you can get good data, but you can't have that meal together, which is really, I think, a kind of important part of the process and really leads to a lot of good sharing and connectivity that can lead to even more ripples. This is the end of my slides, right? And we're turning it over to Lori.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Yeah, I would add too that, more and more people are starting to use ripple effects mapping as a starting point for some strategic planning, which, going back to that formative use of it, it can be very beneficial way to develop a plan going forward, to check in, see how well you're doing in your program, and build on those strengths. So there are 4 core ingredients of ripple effects mapping. The reasons why it works so well, they're all essential. It's kind of like, a cake recipe. If you leave out the baking powder or the sugar or the flour, it's not going to work. So we like to say this recipe needs to be created as a you need all the ingredients in this recipe for it to work. And I'll talk about each of these quickly in turn. So appreciative inquiry it's actually a alternative to more conventional approaches to strategic planning, like using a SWOT analysis or whatever. You see the picture of the 2 ladies there. Discover, dream, design, and do are the 4 components of appreciative inquiry process. Ripple effects mapping uses the first component, discover, and to use positively framed questions to uncover the things that are the benefits, the things that are working well, the things people are most proud of. And I really love this quote, and the reason why appreciative inquiry and the foundational principle of it is that it really is more effective to chart your course based on what's working and the assets you have and the strengths you have, rather than what's not working and what you don't have. So I love that quote, people move in the direction of the stories they tell about themselves. And so for ripple effects mapping, the appreciative inquiry is the basis for the initial step in the process, which is you have your group of people together, you break them into pairs, and for like 10 minutes, they talk about 3 to 5 of these positively framed questions. And here's 3 examples. We have created a database of appreciative inquiry questions that can be used in ripple effects mapping, and all kinds of resources we'll talk about a little bit further on. But one I really like is, what's something that came out of your participation in this program that you're most proud of? So we try to get at people recalling their experiences and ideas from different different ways. So we have several questions that are framed a little bit differently to try to get people to access that information. We don't then go and say, okay, what was your answer to what is a highlight achievement or success? We just basically ask people to start telling their stories, at least in the in-depth rippling approach that myself, Deborah, and Rebecca do. So that's component one. Component two, again, focusing on these interviews and an opportunity for folks to reflect on their experience. Sometimes it may have been a while since they were part of the program, so they may have some uncertainty. There are some people who are ready to just, jump in and start telling their stories, and there's other people like me that do need time to reflect, or kind of shy, maybe want to audition what we want to say. And we only spend about 10 minutes doing this because it really is just priming the pump and getting people ready to talk. And as the ripple mapping unfolds, people, add things in, and it kind of becomes more of an organic conversation where people are talking to each other. This interview, 10 minutes of interviews, is the part where I've encountered the most sometimes resistance. People are like, oh, we all know each other. We don't need to break into groups. Let's just jump into it. And it never works as well if you skip this part. The other thing people like to do is, oh, we want to have, all 5 of us talk in a group for the interview. And again, if you want to give each person 5 minutes, you're suddenly talking about 25 minutes for the appreciative inquiry part instead of 10 minutes. So just pointing out some of the ways that there are reasons for the ways we do this, and it really works. Next slide. The third element of this is that it's very participant driven. I am always amazed. I start out and everybody, when I'm facilitating, everybody's looking at me, they're talking directly to me, they're directing their comments, but I always ask, does anyone have anything to add? I want people to feel welcome to jump in, and pretty soon they're not even looking at me, they're just talking to each other. And I'm just up there capturing everything they're saying on the butcher paper. And by the end, to be able to see this visually, they are so excited, like, we're freaking rock stars, man. Look what we did, and it's very engaging and catalyzing in that way, and positive. And a lot of times people have been involved in these very complex programs. They've only seen a tiny part of the outcomes, but when they get to see what everybody's done, and also how what they've done has rippled out into the community, it's very powerful. Next slide. And then this radiant thinking, it's mind mapping has been used for a long time for a lot of different purposes. And I think evaluation was kind of a novel use of it. And I just want to give a shout out to Deborah Hansen here, because she came up with the term ripple effects mapping, and she's a longtime mind mapper in her personal and professional life. And so she kind of put this together based on a program back in the day in the early 2000s, and here we are. So the radiant thinking and that mind mapping, again, I can't tell you how important it is for people to be able to visualize all the impacts of the work that they've been part of. It's really pretty cool. And talk about ripple effects of ripple effects. I had asked Kristen how she came to ripple effects mapping, and she learned it from Tara Mustel at Montana State University. And Rebecca and Deborah and I have all played a part in training Tara and other folks in MSU Extension. And Abba, I think Deborah and I facilitated that ripple effects mapping session, didn't we? Yeah. And I have to tell you, there's some ripple effects from the ripple effects mapping session, some guidance you gave me, but we'll talk about that later. And I think that's it for me.
Yeah.
Harry.
How does it work? So the first thing is to identify the intervention, and it has to be an intervention where people share the same experience. So we can do it virtually with people who maybe took the same course or the same training program, and they may have been in different geographies, but they have to have the same experience. So trying to do it with something like, what was the effects of going to graduate school and people were in all different kinds of programs? You don't get the same sense of, look what we did, we made a difference, that you get when people have that common experience in common. So once we decide what we want to do and what the focus of it is, we want to schedule the event and invite participants. We kind of almost always have food of some sort at these kind of meetings. We bring the group together, as Lori said, we engage them in those one-on-one conversations to generate interest and energy. We do the mapping session. In some cases, we do follow-up interviews because we want to get more in depth on some of the stories people referenced. And then we want to clean the data, do the coding and analysis, and then the reporting. So the early steps are really identifying the intervention and shaping the invitation so that it's a group of people that all understand that they have something in common. It can be a cross-sector initiative. Lots of times people want to do it with collaborations. We want to invite the stakeholder group, participants and non-participant stakeholders can participate. If it's something that you're involved in, we ask that you kind of take a step back and let the people involved take up more of that verbal space. And we've done it with real large groups, but around 8 to 20 is ideal. And then we want to identify who's going to be the facilitator, who's going to do the mapping, whether it's on the butcher paper or with the computer or both. And oftentimes we also have a note taker. So some examples of contexts where it's worked really well is community garden, community leadership, tribal opioid prevention programs with youth, arts-based community development, community-based public health, community tech projects. And I just want to, sometimes people say, oh, this is too complicated for young people. We've worked with a number of groups that involve kids, 4-H groups, community projects with young people. And young people get it really, really well. And it's really exciting when you've done a ripple map and you hear a kid running out to the car, Mom, you can't believe what we did. And because they never realized they were having such an impact on the community. And examples of kids that sometimes are having trouble finding their way, sitting back and saying, I made a difference here. I actually do matter here, can be extraordinarily powerful for individuals as well as for the whole group to see the importance of working together to complete a project. So we've kind of evolved 3 different approaches. The web mapping maps directly to community capitals, focuses on short, medium, and long-term in-depth rippling. Participants determine the focus of the ripple effect stories, and they probe for the causal chain of events as participants understanding them. And theming and rippling, themes are developed and identified during the session, and negative effects are also discussed during the session. And for most of us that have done this work, if there are negative effects, we do try to find a way to include them in the process. So this is an example of the web mapping, and this is from a project on addressing poverty in the South called TIDE. And that first circle are the things people were doing or thinking about differently, how they're thinking and doing differently, made changes in their interactions with people, with the programs they did, with how they collaborated, who they connected with. And that last circle is focuses on the emergent system change or shared practices that have emerged from that work. And then this next one is the in-depth rippling. And so that's really following through each story and then what happened to really get at how deep and rich the change is. And then the next one is the theming and rippling, and this is that computer-generated chart that focuses on key themes and what the impacts are related to that. And then I think turn it over to who's next?
I am. Thanks, Mary. So I just want to quickly finish up with the last couple slides because I know we want some time for some guided discussion. After the session and you've gathered all that data, one of the key things that we often encourage is that you then go on to analyze it qualitatively. And so oftentimes there's really relevant thematic frameworks or outcomes that you know going in. Other times it's more of an iterative process and you decide to kind of decide what your data is telling you. But overall, the goal here is to ensure that your data is includes everything you need it to include. And then you figure out the best way to analyze it. So we have a couple examples of ways we've analyzed ripple effects mapping. Depending upon the work that you do, these may or may not apply to you, but one of the unique aspects of ripple effects mapping is that it really allows you to apply the framework and use the codes that make the most sense for the work that you're doing. So for example, community capitalist framework is something my colleagues have used quite a bit, looking at better understanding what makes a thriving community, the 7 capitals, and kind of really researching and organizing the ideas that were shared within the ripple effects mapping within these different arenas to be able to show why certain communities are thriving maybe more than others. Another type of evaluation framework that we've used has been the arts-based community development ecosystem, where it kind of looks at different ways of this ecosystem. It's kind of small to see, but you could always Google it if you wanted to. The overall intent, though, is to really figure out what is it that you want to be able to say at the end and use that framework to apply it to your work. We've also used things like policy systems in the environment. There's other types of ecosystems. We've done a lot with understanding community food systems. So really, the idea here to take away is that using the framework that works best for you is possible with ripple effects mapping, and that's one of the areas that makes it a really powerful tool. Continuing on, you can communicate your results in a variety of ways as well. We have found over the years that being able to visualize the results in unique ways really helps to show all the information and all the data that was gathered from ripple effects mapping. So you can see there's a handful of example reports here, but we have many more that we could share as well. Overall, you can really, again, take it and uniquely display it in a way that makes the most sense to your audience. And this allows you to do that. And then on the next slide, one of the reasons that we find ripple effects mapping so useful is that there are both participant and evaluator benefits. As an evaluator, I'm often thinking through like, what is it that this evaluation is going to bring me? What are the ways in which it's advantageous? But what's great about ripple effects mapping is that it also helps the participants who are involved in the mapping as well. So they really get to engage in this fun and interesting session. They learn about what the work they've done. They get to visually see it displayed, and it helps them kind of connect back to a larger purpose. On the evaluator side of things, right, Scott talked through kind of that idea of being able to do it at multiple times in the program. You really are able to triangulate your information that you might be gathering elsewhere as well. There's a group validation of your results. And it really allows us to capture kind of more complex situations that more simple evaluations, like maybe using a survey or a focus group, doesn't necessarily allow you to get to. With that being said, though, we do acknowledge that there are some limitations. And so there's certainly some risk of bias. You really have to think through who's going to be around the table, why are they there, and why are others not. Those who are there, do they truly understand the holistic aspect of the program? There's certainly inconsistency in implementation depending upon who might be doing the session. And there are power differences that you do have to contend with and think through. All of these things are all stuff that us ripple effects mapping experts have talked about and thought through. We actually have a community of practice that we meet quarterly and discuss all these different aspects of ripple effects mapping, ways to use it, ways to help improve it. And so if this is something you're interested in, please feel free to contact Scott Chasden. We always welcome new members, and we're always excited to have new people come and talk with us and share our love of this very fascinating evaluation tool. So with that, we're going to go ahead and drop the PowerPoint so that we can all see each other. And I will turn the floor over, I believe.
I'll go ahead and lead us towards wrapping up. So I want to extend huge gratitude to all the practitioners and founders of ripple effects mapping for being here today. I think, you know, just to echo, we're all really excited about this approach, and, you know, it's so many years into the making of it and refining this process. So just feel really lucky to be able to learn it at this stage and share it with others and hopefully become trained in how to carry it out. So thank you for the opportunity, and for everyone for being here today and engaging with us. We look forward to following up with each of you to continue these conversations and invite you to future convenings we have. All of them, we're calling them the brown bag seminar sessions. All of them will be around topics related to how to capture and communicate environmental and geo impact. And it will take different themes, or some of them will also be specific approaches like this. So if you're interested, we'd love to just keep you in the loop. And if you have any ideas for topics or feedback on the format, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll put my email in the chat. And thank you so much to Shayna for really spearheading, organizing this, and making it happen. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day to everyone.